Saints who were known to do harsh penances, such as St. Catherine of Siena, who ate little to nothing and scourged herself 3 times a day, and St. Rose of Lima, who pierced her head with pins to attach her veil, as well as other extreme penances, are so foreign to us that in today's time we would consider these behaviors to be mentally unstable. But mortifying the body, such as fasting, has always been encouraged by the Church, although not to the extreme many saints practiced. In fact, because mortifications have the danger of stemming from pride, thinking of ourselves as holy can not only become a show, but also can be dangerous for the body. However, some saints are called to these extraordinary penances by the design of God. Yet, humility must always be present and should be done only with the guidance of a confessor. St.Veronica Giuliani is one of these people whom God had chosen to be a victim soul. From the earliest age, God inflamed her heart with such love for God that even as a baby, she held out her hands to hug and kiss the pictures of Jesus and Mary. When her mother would try to draw her away, Veronica would cry. But let's start at the beginning, as there's so much to tell, even with the first few years of Veronica's life. We should start by saying that before she was Veronica, she was Ursula. She was born on December 27, 1660, in Mercatello. She was the 7th child, although 2 died in infancy. Ursula is described as lively. In fact, she was so lively that she was given the nickname Fuoco, which means fire. As said before, the fire of love started very early in her heart. And as a toddler, she would toddle to the pictures of Jesus and Mary and say, "I am yours and you are mine." At the age of 3, she began to receive visits from Jesus and Mary. They would talk to her and teach her about God's love, and sometimes the child Jesus would play with her. One time, she saw the child Jesus near her while she was picking flowers. She writes, "I was in the garden picking flowers to bring to the child Jesus. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I couldn't have been older than 3 years old. And while I was picking these flowers, I saw the child Jesus nearby, who was also picking flowers, and he said to me, 'I am the true flower.' And it seemed that he flew up to the house. I followed behind with such a pace so fast that it seemed I didn't touch the ground. I looked for him everywhere, behind the doors, in all places. I remember that I went down again to the garden to see if he returned there, but I could no longer find him. I only said this, 'For me, flowers, you can stay there. I don't want any other flower than Jesus.'" When Ursula was 6 years old, her mother died. On her deathbed, her mother assigned each of her 5 remaining children to a wound of Christ. Ursula was assigned the wound in Jesus' side. Along with her fiery love, Ursula also had a fiery personality. She believed that everyone should love Jesus to the extreme that she did, and if not, they would get yelled at by her. Later, this fault was ironed out by our Lord, but it took some time. She enjoyed making little altars for Jesus, and whenever anyone would come to visit, she would lead them inside by the hand and bring them to the altar to make homage to Jesus and Mary. She writes, "To those that did this, I gave most of my breakfast, kissed them, embraced them, and kept them with me. Sometimes there was someone so obstinate that it was not possible to make them bend their knees or revere Jesus and Mary. I shouted very much at these people, and then I led them out the door of the house and closed the door so they would not come back." She did the same with her father and sisters, and they knew better than not to comply. Ursula also had a great compassion for the poor. Like her love for God, she had a hard time suppressing her love and concern for the poor. One time, a poor man came to the house asking for alms. Having nothing to give him, she reached down and took her shoe off and gave it to him. This was a special sacrifice because she had just received the new shoes, and since they were very poor, she didn't get new shoes very often. But the man took her shoe and went away happy, which made her happy. But then he turned around and came back, asking for the other shoe. So Ursula happily gave him the other shoe, and again the man left happy. Many years later, while in prayer, Ursula saw the Lord carrying a pair of golden shoes, and he said to her, "These are the shoes that you gave me when you were a child." I was the poor man. Ursula had wanted to receive Holy Communion as soon as she understood it, and she began to pester about receiving around the age of 5. So much did she pester her confessor that she would even stand next to whoever was receiving Holy Communion with her mouth hanging open, hoping to receive too. When Ursula was 9 years old, she was finally able to make her first Holy Communion. In receiving that most holy host, it seemed to me that a fire entered my heart. I felt myself burning. I couldn't stay still. Meanwhile, I didn't want to attract attention. I saw all those who had received communion with me were completely composed, and I was amazed that they could remain so still, while I felt a fire that made me want to rejoice. I said to myself, "They are still, I will remain that way too." But try as she might, she was unable to sit still. When Ursula grew old enough to get married, she told her father she wanted to be a nun. But he resisted, having given away 2 of his daughters to the convent already. Instead, he brought over many different suitors he thought would be good husbands for her, and he, as well as the suitors, spent their time trying to entice Ursula with worldly things. They talked about how difficult the convent life can be and all the good things that she could do in the world. This sort of talk actually made Ursula feel sick to her stomach, and the more they talked, the sicker she felt. She tried to endure this for the sake of suffering, but finally she couldn't take it anymore and let them know that such talk was making her sick. Then she began to cry. Seeing her distress, they felt sorry and said they wouldn't talk to her of the world anymore. She said, "I think today will be the last day you will speak to me, because I will never come in your presence again." Still, it wasn't over, because she had to continue to spend time with the men under obedience to her father. To make things even harder, an uncle that lived with them also pressured Ursula to marry. He was much more aggressive about it than her father, and he would constantly talk to her about it, delivering messages from suitors, and even brought her flowers to soften her up. She took the flowers and threw them out the window, saying, "Either you keep quiet or I will depart from you. Do not bring me such messages, because I do not know of any of those men, nor do I want to marry any of them. My spouse is Jesus. He is the one I want. He is mine." This trial went on for 2 years, until her father finally relented and let Ursula enter the convent. Ursula felt drawn to enter the Capuchin convent for their austere life, and she entered on October 28, 1677, taking the name of Veronica. She lived her religious life much like she had in the world, with prayer, penances, and ecstasies, but with even more ardor. This fire in her heart made her thirst to suffer for sinners, and she begged Jesus to allow her to be a mediatrix between God and sinners, and to partake in Jesus' wounds. In answer to her prayer, Jesus gave her his crown of thorns. This was so painful that her entire face swelled up. She wrote in her diary, "I felt the piercing of the thorns all the way inside my mouth, inside my ears, all over my head, in my eyes, in my temple, and in my brain. I was in such pain that I fell to the ground as if dead. The Lord lifted me from the ground and said to me, 'You will feel these pains as long as you live, sometimes more, sometimes less, according to what I desire.'" When the other sisters saw her face and head all swollen and contorted in pain, the superior sent for the doctor, who cauterized areas of her head and made incisions behind her ears for bloodletting. All of these remedies only made her pain worse and, of course, did nothing. Veronica's desire to offer herself for sinners continued to grow, and with permission from her confessor, she made many acts of penances, such as carving the name of Jesus with a knife on her chest and wearing a garment full of thorns, which she called her embroidered vestment. Although Veronica's penances were extreme, they went unnoticed by the other sisters because they were doing penances too, although not to the same extreme. In those days, it was common to scourge oneself, especially in the religious life. But it's important to note that Veronica never did any of her extreme penances without the approval of her spiritual director, who was watching over her soul carefully. She never wanted anyone around her to suffer. When she was novice mistress, she would give her new novices her used habits, since new habits were made of wool and generally were very scratchy at first. After some use, the wool smoothed down, and so Veronica would give the novices her old used ones. Veronica suffered inwardly as well. Jesus permitted her to experience aridity and temptations of every kind. During this time, Jesus appeared to her and communicated to her things of his passion. Under obedience by her confessor, she was ordered to write of everything she experienced into a diary. On Easter 1694, Veronica became mystically married to Jesus. In 1669, after Christmas Eve Mass, Sister Veronica visited the creche in the nativity scene, and the statue of the baby Jesus suddenly came to life. Joyfully, Veronica pressed the baby Jesus close to her heart, asking him to take it. And so he did. Here, I truly cannot say with my pen anything that I felt at that point. I only remember that the child Jesus had something in his hand, like a bow and an arrow, and it seemed to me that he shot it directly at my heart. When she came out of ecstasy, she discovered that she had been wounded in the heart and that she was bleeding. This wound caused her great pain and it bled continuously. Along with this pain, she had a mystical fire inside of her heart that kept her so animated that she was unable to sleep at night. At times, the wound would close up, but reopen at certain times, like Holy Communion. When it was open, it would bleed and cause such a burning desire that Veronica could do nothing but pray for sinners. The fire that burned within her would at times make her act crazy, especially when she received Holy Communion. One time, after receiving the host from the priest, she felt such a burning within her that she began shouting and running around without realizing what she was doing. Another time, she jumped up and rang the bell during the liturgy. All of these things brought unwanted attention, and she experienced a lot of humiliation from them. Many times, I had such an ardent desire for Holy Communion, and I said as much to the confessor, but he, who must have known that it was not pure desire, deprived me of communion. I felt this strongly. I offered that act of obedience to God. Veronica experienced extreme aridity of spirit and also feelings of abandonment of God. She writes, "The more we lower ourselves, the more we know ourselves. The more we go down into our being, the lower we go. The less we know that which we are, this is the place where one learns humility." Veronica received the stigmata on April 5, 1697. She writes, "In an instant, I saw 5 resplendent rays come out from his most holy wounds, and they all came toward me. And it passed through my heart from my side to side, and the nails passed through my hands and feet. In an instant, everything disappeared. I returned to myself and found myself with my arms outstretched, completely numb, and with great pain in my hands, feet, and heart. I felt the wound in my heart was open and bleeding. I took my crucifix, which I keep in my cell, and I offered myself and dedicated myself entirely to him, and I said, 'My Lord, pain with pains, thorns with thorns, wounds with wounds. Behold, I am all yours, crucified with you, crowned with thorns with you, wounded with you. With Christ, I am nailed to the cross.'" After receiving the stigmata, Veronica no longer inflicted harsh penances upon herself. She realized that intense penances had very little to do with daily life, and her physical sufferings of the stigmata and spiritual sufferings that intensified were enough. The abbess was deeply concerned when she learned of Veronica's stigmata. She didn't want to draw any sort of attention to the monastery, and she and the bishop decided to take extreme measures. In order to test Veronica's humility, the Holy Office renounced her role as novice mistress, and she was isolated in the infirmary for 50 days. No one was allowed to talk to her, not even the sisters. Eventually, she was even deprived of Holy Communion and could attend Mass only on Sundays and holy days near the door of the church. This lasted 10 years, and Sister Veronica's behavior to the treatment was strictly observed by all those around her. In the end, it was reported to the Holy Office that Veronica had obeyed every one of his orders, and she showed not the slightest sign of sadness despite all his harsh treatment. So on March 7, 1716, the Holy Office revoked all restrictions. 1 month later, on April 5, 1716, St. Veronica was elected abbess of the community, an office that would be renewed every 3 years until her death. Veronica didn't want this position, as she feared that pride would affect her soul, but her confessor told her, "Be quiet and obey." Although Veronica didn't have much schooling in her life, and at one point didn't know how to read, she was very smart. As said before, she didn't like to bring suffering to anyone, and as the sisters had to bring water in buckets from the well, and then had to climb 40 steps to the kitchen and back, she strategized to have the convent installed with lead pipes to bring water in. This was not done often in those days, and it took special authorization from the Duke of Tuscany to get it done. When Veronica was made abbess, the Blessed Mother began a series of special visits with her. Here, Veronica knelt at the feet of Mary, where she received special instruction. Mary told her how to direct the community, and once scolded Veronica for not coming to her as often as she should to ask for graces. One time, Veronica and the sisters were very startled and frightened to discover a large fire in the church. Immediately, Veronica prayed to the Blessed Virgin that she would put out the fire. In her heart, she felt the Blessed Virgin tell her not to be afraid and that she would take care of everything. Following an inner impulse, Veronica went to the flames that had nearly engulfed the entire church and made the sign of the cross over it, and immediately the fire died out. Mary directed Veronica to have recourse to her in all matters. Any time that Veronica would have any concerns about the convent, Mary would remind her, "I am the superior. You do not need to worry about that." Her angels as well, who the Blessed Virgin had appointed Veronica with 2 guardian angels, also reminded Veronica that she was to rely completely on God for everything. One time, she realized there wouldn't be enough eggs to go around for breakfast, and her angels said to her, "Do not worry, there are enough eggs." And when making breakfast, Veronica never ran out of eggs. Another time, someone gave a cake to one of the sisters, who then gave it to Veronica, asking her to slice a piece of cake for all the sisters. But the cake was small, and Veronica knew there wouldn't be enough. Again, she was reminded to trust God to meet all her needs, no matter how small. And as she cut the cake, it grew bigger each time, until each nun had a slice, including a second slice for the sister who it was originally given to. On June 6, 1727, it's said that she was struck down with paralysis, or perhaps a stroke, and she suffered a triple martyrdom of physical pains, moral sufferings, and diabolical temptations. Her last words to her sisters were, "Love has been found. This has been the cause of my suffering. Tell everyone." 3 days later, she died. Through the wounding of her heart, Jesus had told Veronica many times that he had implanted all 5 of his wounds on her heart. This evidence was proved true when, after her death, it was discovered her heart had imprinted upon it the symbols of the 5 wounds of Jesus, as well as the names of Jesus and Mary. The imprints of this phenomena had remained visible until 1981, when it finally faded away.